Sit, sit on your hands. Hang on, I'll tell you when it records.
Boom.
Right, go. So, in other words, then, so yeah, you were saying.
Well, anyway, what I was about to say was that even though I had an American roommate that was speaking English and sometimes Spanish, which was okay because I speak Spanish too. I knew already from the experience in Mexico how to totally immerse myself in France.
So go with that. So obviously, so when you contacted me about the trip. So in other words, let's just give you a bit of context. So in other words, Brenda works with me as a student. Brenda had obviously been, in the time I've known her, gone to Paris, done some work in Paris. Brenda wanted to come on the language trip that was organised for my students in the summer of this year. She'd wanted to do last year, but because work was so, after her and in demand, and she didn't know when she's going to finish, she wasn't able to do that. So in other words, then, what did you put into place in Paris, knowing that going outside of Paris would be linguistically easier to not speak English? What little small measures, if there's anybody who is listening to this who is going to Paris, like unavoidably to Paris, where it's harder to just sit in the French and not be exposed to English, what little measures did you put into place? Like, what disciplines did you put into place to stay with that French thing rather than just become part of like the whole American in Paris scene? What did you do for that?
Well, because I've been to Paris a lot, and because I've actually lived in Paris for 7 months working on a job, I acquired friends. I had friends from that production, but I also had friends. I know a lot of people in the world, and a lot of them live in France, in Paris, that are Parisians. One of my dear friends, Marie France, is Parisian. She was born and raised.
But linguistically, then, so because you've known them in other contexts, did you get a bit stroppy and say, no, bitch, speak in French?
Exactly. My friends that own restaurants and bars, they don't speak English. English is not their first language. They are Parisians. They speak French. I mean, that's that's their maternal language, and they never really spoke English to me anyway, because they said, you're here, you need to speak French, because they love their language and they know I love their language. So it was relatively easy for me to be in Paris this time and not speak English, because I just went well, first of all, I'm by myself. My husband did not come. He's British. It was really easy for me to just stay in my French space. I didn't have
Give me some examples of how that manifested for you. So for example, if you walked in, so I, for example, have been with you, and this was when you were briefly in Paris, when I went just before. And this was part of when you were doing like a family tour thing. And we were in the Marais, and we walked into a knitting and, fabric and cotton and accessory shop. And they'd obviously heard the fact that we were speaking to each other in English. And we walked in, and in a way that I thought was almost patronizing to you, the lady serving said, "Oh, can I help you?" And what I just thought was badass was the way that you went, "Oui, en français, bonjour," and then just basically remaining in the French. So in a working day, how often did you have to find yourself fighting to say to somebody, "No, in French, please"? Like if you went in a shop or that kind of thing? Or
in Paris, a lot, because they're like, "Ooh, this is my opportunity to speak English."
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And I would just go, "Je ne comprends pas."
Nice.
They would speak English to me, and then they'd flip over. And so, but I had to say it a lot. But then when I was only in Paris for 5 days, because I wanted to get to Besançon. And my game plan for Besançon was to use it as a base, stay there for the entire
Hang on. So you're talking about when we were first in Paris, you and I. You're talking about this year.
This year.
Right.
This
So
year.
let's just put that into context to people. So for people. So basically, guys, then what had happened? I'd said the same as last year. I will be running a language trip, which is primarily throughout the day. And let's be honest, it's like a freaking boot camp of French. It's go, 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 French, French, French. It's mentally exhausting. But the fact is, Brenda had said, Luke, I would like to tag on some additional time in France, several weeks. I'd like to spend a chunk of time in France before. And Brenda had said to me, so we chose, as most of you who follow this site know, I choose Besançon because I have like a connection there. And also because it's a pretty city. And because the population is low enough that there's enough people to speak to and they're grateful to speak to you because they're not overwhelmed, because it's August, they're empty, everybody's in the south. The people that remain, it's just nice. You can spend all day speaking French and they're happy to speak. And Brenda had said to me, Luke, recommend me a place. I'll use somewhere as a base. I will use somewhere as a base. Recommend me a place, you said, where I can go where you don't think the accent will overwhelm me. It's a nice neutral accent. Those are the words that you said to me. And then I'll come and meet you guys in Besançon for the trip. And I said, Brent, why don't you use Besançon itself so that you A, then know the town, city, and B, because it is neutrally really linguistically okay, and C, because I felt that for several reasons. Firstly, there's a lady that had done the same thing in the group, Gabby, who'd done the same thing last year and had enjoyed it as a location. And additionally, I just feel, as I've said, that it would have just suited your purposes because there's just the necessity to speak in English. You just can't use in French. There's just not the English there. So in other words, we're up to the point where you've decided to go and spend some time in France, and you've decided to spend some time in Besançon before coming on the language trip. Talk us through what you then did in terms of finding somewhere to stay. What did you organize for yourself? Did you do a lot of research, or did you go, no, I'll just wing it when I'm there? What did you look up in advance? So talk us through how you found accommodation and all of this. So if there's an American woman watching of your age who thinks, oh, I could never ever dream of just moving to a city for a couple of 3 months, tell me what you did to make this work logistically.
Logistically, I made sure I had a train ticket, but I first went on Airbnb because the way I like to do it is I like to have the place booked before I buy my train ticket. I knew that I was going to be in France. So I went on Airbnb.
Can I just stop you there and ask you about that specifically? Because this is exactly what people want to know. And this is exactly why people find this interesting. So if we look at 3 models, and you've mentioned 2 of them already, there are 3 basic models that people will follow when they go on a foreign language trip for the language. And weirdly, last year I had 3 different girls that I work with all doing those. So we had Gabby, who went and got herself accommodation. It was actually a shared. So this is a woman, a grandma who owns property, who has her own, accommodation and in England, and to go and live like a student. So she basically went and found an Airbnb style rent. It wasn't through Airbnb, it was through a local site, but she found residential accommodation. It was a flat share. As it happened, the other people in the flat share were French speaking. So she's already got the French housemate situation. And she didn't go and do any. She said, do you recommend any classes? I said, do I go and join groups and social stuff? And she joined groups and social stuff when she was there. We then had a situation with a woman called Catherine, who, another nice lady, and she thought she'd split the difference. So she did the other option that you've previously mentioned yourself with a host family. And host families often can go one of 2 ways. Either they're like, yeah, we love to have people around. It's great for the kids. Fine, we'll all be in French, or we'll all be in Spanish, we'll all be in Italian, whatever's going on. They're getting some money from you and they're happy to have like a lodger or a tenant. Or it can be, hey, we've got a free English teacher for our kids. And the obligation that comes with that reduced rent is you have to speak to the kids for X amount of hours per day as a de facto English teacher, which is what happened to Catherine. So whilst you are, I guess, living with French people, most of the conversation that, as you know, is this incidental in the street, in the corridor, talking about stuff in the kitchen, in the bathroom, that was then in English for her. So she lost that. And then the third model that you'd done before last year was Angela, who, with all the enthusiasm in the world, spent a lot of money, booked on a residential where everybody else there was English first language, or, you know, European first language who spoke English, because, you know, and then booked on this residential where basically French is taught as a foreign language for a good couple of weeks. And with all due respect, perfectly bright woman, perfectly lovely, just came back and that really hadn't worked for her. And of the 3 last year, Gabby's model had worked the best, which, without being an arrogant idiot, is what I said, why I'd said, I told you so, all of you. I said, go and do this. So, in other words, why did you this time, why did you not want to do the language course model again? Why did you want the organic thing? And why did you not do the host family thing again? Why did you do it the other way? Bearing in mind, those are the other 2 options. And you did the right thing, but tell me why.
Oh, I thought about it, and I did speak with Gabby, and because I wanted her input on it. And I knew about Catherine. You know, I knew the other scenarios that didn't quite work. I don't think I need to go to school anymore, which is why I didn't do that option. And I've lived with the family. I lucked up in Mexico. Those people are still my family. You know, they're my tias, my tios, they're my family.
Your primos, your primas, but they spoke to you
Yeah.
in Spanish when you were there, though, yeah?
Yeah, he didn't speak English, but they're my family, and that was such a very rich experience because they're my family. I mean, I would just go there and spend Christmas with them. You know, no class, no anything, but they're my family. Um, I I wanted to be on my own because I'm aggressive enough to be able to go out into the streets and get what I want, you know, to sit down. I don't have any problem sitting down in a restaurant. And to be quite honest with you, people approach you
People
more.
are drawn to you. They are very drawn to you. I've always noticed this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
remember that.
people will come up to you. There, as a man, when you walk through anywhere, unless you walk in certain areas, I suppose, generally, whenever you are in the company of a woman of any age, you notice eyes going to people, because it's in a way that men aren't looked at. And there's a good and a bad to that. There's a good and a bad to that. Sometimes men make people feel, you know, like there's a potential security risk, which is horrible, but it's the world we live in. And sometimes it's on a sexual, but sometimes it's on a sexual, but also just a social level. You're fun, there's the big hair, there's the cool, there's the great style of dressing, there's all of this. People, that's men and women. When I'm with you in France, they just float across the pavement towards you. Don't they? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They just
So
do.
I didn't have any, I knew that, like I said, I was aggressive. I wasn't scared. I don't put out oh my God, I'm
No,
sitting
no,
here
no.
and scared. I'm like, welcome, come on in. So I chose the Airbnb. I didn't want to do a flat chair because I don't want to share my toilet with anyone. Um, I just wanted, I was very happy in my apartment. I was very happy walking the streets of Besançon. I met a lot of wonderful people. I'm sitting in the plaza, just having some food, and this mother and daughter and little baby, so it was 3 generations, sit next to me, and she could tell that I wasn't, I didn't live in Besançon. And she just sort of said hello in English. And I said, oh, hi. And she said, are you American? And I answered yes. And she was dumbfounded. And she said, why are you here? And I said, en français. And she then she flipped to French. And her
So she
mom,
respected straight away the
right,
fact that you
and
were.
her
Yeah.
mom didn't speak any English. And so for that meal, we had a great time. I found out that her mother lives in Besançon. She lives in the South, and she came up to visit her mother. And she would dumbfounded that how did I find Besançon? What was I thinking? This is not the town she would expect me to be in. And, we had a good laugh about it.
Because
And
that's exactly the point, because it's not a tourist town. So if we were kind of trying to formulate a guide for people who are thinking of doing this, we'd straight away say anywhere that's heavily touristy, don't
go.
include. Now let's be clear, Besançon's completely, there's enough to look at. You've got Roman ruins, you've got greenery, you've got whatever European facades. But the reason I always choose it for people is it isn't even spiteful. In Paris, people will often flip into English first and foremost because, as you've correctly identified, they want to practice their English because for professional purposes, it might be something they need. Secondly, particularly if they sniff American, there's a tipping culture in America that they are aware of. And they sort of feel if you make it easier for someone to communicate, are you going into English? They don't know straight away whether you're there for French. Most people in Paris aren't there for the French. Most people are there on holiday. So they'll go to, or for the tourism. So they'll go into the English because they think they're going to get a bigger tip. So, if we were trying to formulate a how to copy Brenda guide for anybody watching this, our first thing would be, number one, fine, see Paris while you're there. If you're coming from the United States and you've never spent any time in Paris, you should allow some time in Paris. It's beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
But we're also saying maybe don't make that your destination because it's going to be tougher. There's just going to, purely by virtue of the fact it's a capital city, there is going to be a load of people that speak English and we're going to want to speak English. So yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
I have to say that everywhere I went in Besançon, everyone that I spoke to said, "Why are you here?
yeah.
Why did you pick Besançon? Really?" And I equated to being in California, being in Los Angeles, and going to stay in Reseda. It's like, what are you doing staying in Reseda? Why aren't you in Los Angeles?
Yeah.
And so much so, I found an artist co-op, and I joined their community, and the guy said, I'm gonna have to take a picture of you and put you on the wall because I can't believe that you're here in Besançon just to speak French, and that he was dumbfounded why I chose his city to be in, why I chose his town. And he says, we have to put a picture of you up here. And I'm like, oh, you guys are silly.
Let's just tell an anecdote about how fearless you are, which is basically, so I'd said to you, right, I'm here for you 24/7. A, because I'm just excited you're in France on personal levels for me. But secondly, I was like, but if you want advice or anything or recommendations, I'm here for you. But otherwise, just check in with me. And for my mind, the first week that you were there, even just anecdotally, when you were telling me what people were saying, so you went from telling me what somebody had said and going, oh, I think she said this, this, this. So you started doing impressions of the people. So you'd quote the people to me of what they'd said to you. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to comment on this, but there's longer and longer sentences in what Brenda is quoting, and it's just sounding correct. And then at the same time as you doing that, we obviously maintained our weekly class. And I'm noticing that the words I'm giving you to copy, just your basic ability to copy those words is getting much, much stronger and has remained much, much stronger since then. So I always say to people, when people go, realistically, how much can I absorb in the time that I'm there? I always say to people, it's not even just about that, although that does have a role. It's about just something happens in your ear and breaks your ear. And it's three things. It's firstly, you don't spend all day using your mouth in English. So you just kind of remind your mouth, there are different ways to be. You don't have to be in English the whole time. Secondly, there's something that just breaks in your brain that I always try and preach to you guys about, this blurry thing. And when you actually spend a serious amount of time in France, you actually go, yeah, I get the blur thing. I'm just going to have to listen to the blur thing and recreate the blur thing. And that you did absolutely in spades. Like you did that so well. But also it's just this ability of just not enunciating and just this vowel copying and all of this. And that just took off, and just the longer amount of thing. The anecdote that I wanted to tell people that I just thought showed how fearless you were. So you were in Paris and you went to jump on the RER. So to make this clear to any like Americans or Europeans that don't know France, so this is basically a commuter train, not the metro, that will cross Paris from outside in the suburbs on one side to the suburbs on the other side. It will go via Paris. There's a few stops in the middle, including very important, things like, the Stadium of France and, central stations. Brits, it would be the equivalent of like the Thames Link or something. So, but if you got on the wrong thing, it'd be like being in Penn Station, in Penn State, and then whoosh, you're out into kind of, New Jersey or something. So the one time, and there's different destinations and some trains which stop and some trains which don't stop. So the one day you messaged me and you were like, Luke, I'm actually at the airport. And I was like, what the shit? Is David sick? Are you having to go home? And you were like, no, I got the last train. I'd been out for dinner. I'd had a really great time. I got the last train. I got the wrong train. It's taking me to the airport, but it was all an experience. And I'm just going to stay the night in a hotel and come back tomorrow morning. And I just thought I thought that was so, so brave. Right. So answer me some specific questions. What was the moment? So if when you were in Spanish speaking Mexico and you had the acción moment, or the acción if you're in Mexico, what was the linguistic moment when you went, ooh, on this trip? What was the linguistic moment when you were like, yay, I'm speaking French? Where was the excitement on this trip? Was the one moment that was the first time you had that?
Let me think. I was in Besançon, and I try to go to the same like little boulangerie every day.
You try to create a routine, which is a very clever thing as a bit of advice for anybody else as well. Is they're going to be more likely to speak to you if you go to the same cafe to get your coffee, you go to the same boulangerie, you go to the same patisserie, you go to the same supermarket, you get served by the same man or woman. That's generally good advice. Yeah.
That's what locals do.
Yeah.
They don't go from different place to different place.
Exactly.
I do the same thing here in Chicago and in LA, which is why people.
Yeah.
And so I was in there the first day. The woman is bonjour, bonjour, and we have a couple of moments, but I panicked because I'm thinking, well, I don't know what the hell she just said. And because I was nervous, and I kind of panicked, broke out some English for a minute, and I was panicked. And then the next time I went in, she kind of said, good morning. She was trying to be nice to me by giving me respect because, she goes, oh, she's an American in her head. And then like a couple of days later, I walked in and she goes, she forgot that she knew
Not
I was
besoin, yeah.
But she just sort of forgot. She was speaking French to me. She was asking me, I haven't seen you in a couple of days. Where have you been? How are you enjoying your trip? I mean, we were having a conversation, and she was the owner of the place. And I answered her back, and we had a nice conversation. And she asked me if I wanted to sit outside. We just had this, it was unbroken conversation. And I went outside, sat down, and she brought my meal to me and said a couple of more words. And when she left, I was like, yes, yes.
This is something that is really important. And I noticed this with you watching you when I went to France, since you'd been there for a bit, which is a lot of the time people will say something. And I then go to translate for the group to check everybody's got it. And you went, no, I've got it, what they said. So somebody wouldn't necessarily be in a position where they could literally word for word give it back to me what the person had just said, but there's something about their linguistic development in French as a foreign language that you understood what had been said, which is the main point. And that's a nice organic halfway house. And when you stop fighting and go, I don't need to stop every word she says and go away and dictionary look up, or I need to go and look this up, I'm just going to get used to it. And there's a lot of non-verbal communication as well, or there's even verbal communication which isn't purely linguistic, like the tones and things that you kind of need to learn in a country, and that you got very strong on. Like you very much pick up on the narrative of what was going on. What would be your piece of advice of something you wished you'd done sooner? I think this might involve the artists community or the knitting hub, but I'm not sure. What is something you wished you'd have done sooner and you would recommend that people do sooner? Like, which of your strategies to get access to people would you wish you'd have done sooner? And what is something that you wish you'd done differently?
Well, let's do with the differently part first, because it has to do with the sooner part. First of all, I would not go to France in August, only because
Is that because of the holidays and people being away, or the heat, or?
everyone is gone in Besançon, and speaking specifically for a smaller town.
Mhm.
People are not there. Businesses are closed, and they don't open until the end of August.
So, in other words, other people that are going for a week, it works because there's fewer people. The people there are just happy to have company anyway, like regardless of whether you are, yeah.
Right.
But if you are somebody that is making a life for themselves and wants a little bit more of a dynamic experience, you would say no, don't quite do the August. Maybe just do before it or after it. I take your point. I take your
Yeah,
point.
I would do it. I would do it before, or I would do it toward the end of August.
Yeah. Or like
Because,
the September with La Rentrée and everything's back up. And
yeah,
I see what you mean. I see what you
yeah.
mean. You want
because-
the dynamism. Yeah.
And in Paris, the same thing holds true, but there's just so many people in Paris.
You'd
It
never
matters.
without. You never
But
without. Yeah. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
as far as I I accidentally found this little community of artists. I mean, literally, I'm nosy. And I'm walking down the street and I go, oh, what's in there? But then I look on the door and it's like, oh man, they're not coming back for it. And, but I try to do the same thing sort of every day. I mean, I vary it as far as walking is concerned. But to get from where I was to get to the tram, I needed to pass this one place. And one day I was walking and the door was open. And I was like, okay, this door is open. And I kind of look around, I don't see anybody. So I'm figuring, well, why not? So I go in, I open the door and I go, bonjour, bonjour, bonjour. And they were way in the back, and this girl came out, and I had a lot of questions for her because it was right up my alley. um as far as it was community that had sewing machines. You could go in there and actually do a project: knitting, sewing, um pottery, woodworking, things like this. And they had all the equipment that you needed. You didn't need to bring anything to their party, everything was there. And so I got all the information, and then it was like maybe a week before they actually opened. So I was there.
I see what you mean. So, I mean, this brings us to a couple of things. So, there are holiday courses for adults in France, very much so. And people always say to me, hey, Luke, recommend a language course for me. And I say, yeah, go and sign up to a horse riding course with French people, or go and sign up to a yachting thing, or a hiking thing, or I'll say, go and act. So, in other words, act like you're a local. And
Oh
one of
yeah.
the things that did really well is, so for example, obviously in Besançon, there's my friends, Jean-Louis, Vero. It's Jean-Louis' birthday today, by the way, and Vero. And I was like, and when we were dropping other people back at their relative flats and all of this business, what was nice is Vero was like, oh no, but Brenda's local. Like she can, she knows where this is, she's local. And that's really cool when you make that reputation for yourself. But in other words, yes, I think that's really cool. So within the group that we had the following week, then, so, as you know, I would take people into specific shops. So, within the group, amongst others, then a few random examples. So, we'd have John, who, along with his wife Susan, sell Catholic medals sourced often from France and Europe that they will then recreate and sell. And so I knew that there was a shop in Besançon, a Ciergerie, which sells like religious candles. And I thought, okay, this would be a place for them to go, knowing that other than the French English thing, they're going to talk, in other words, no pun intended, they're going to talk shop. They're going to talk shop.
Well, yeah.
I took you into the knitting shop where, let's be honest, your kind of knowledge surpassed the woman. And you
Yeah.
did a couple of like, what would you recommend things? And you were like, yeah, no, I wouldn't go with that. I'd go with that. But again, you're talking about more than. So I think this generally picks up on what you said about being nosy. When your desire to communicate about something is so strong, you'll learn the language. And that's often why when men and women, and I don't like roles and stereotypes and genders and all of this, but when men and women move to a country, the woman will often talk more locally because the desire to communicate and be part of the community is just that little bit stronger traditionally. So my recommendation to anybody watching this would be, yeah, fine, you've picked your country, you've picked your language. Find the local group of whatever it is you're into, be that softball, baseball, basketball. Go and join a club, go and join a league. Go and if that is an activity in an enterprise which has a summer course, then by all means do that. If that is one which is, right, guys, happy summer, we'll see you again in the September, then don't do that. So, for example, if you are so we had, for example, Jason last year. Jason is an avid, American basketball fan, like avid, and randomly, by pure fluke, there is the daughter of one of my friends who lives in Besançon, who's actually a professional basketball school. And this set Jason off. And it's not that Jason would have never have spoken French, but Jason is like, about this basketball thing. So, and I just think that's a way to kind of live your best life and also to become, when I say bilingual, I don't mean you know everything, but I mean as in you have an existence in France. So I would say, to go back to Gabby, then, the lady that you spoke to that did the same thing last year, I said, I'm so sick of hearing your children say that your hobby is learning French. I want them just to say, oh, mom's got a life in France. Mom's got French friends. I had this daydream of when people would just walk into their mom's kitchen and just hear her chatting in French in the room and go, does your mom speak French? And rather than them saying, yeah, my mom's learning French, which is what they used to say, I wanted them to say, oh, yeah, my mom's got like a life there, or she goes there for a chunk of the year, or she's got different exchanges, or she's got different friends. And one of the things which is great is, before a lot of these holidays, people that I've taught have exchanges, and you all organize the exchange thing and you all do this. But like you with your little family in Besançon, in France afterwards, once you've got friends, you don't call them to speak in French to practice your French. You call them to speak in French to speak to them, to see how they're doing, what their life is, how are they, how's the son, how are people growing, how's his school, how's your job, how's your, you had a heart problem, how's that, your dad was sick, what's going on. And that's then giving you a life. You are existing in that language. Do you know what I mean, and stuff?
Yeah, well, I have to say that when I was in Besançon, like I said, I do have friends that live in France.
Yes, because you went to Nîmes and all of that, didn't you, as well?
Yeah. To Set,
and said,
because
yeah,
they were at their parents' house, their dad, Sebastian's mom and dad.
yes,
That's where they were staying for the summer. And Sebastian, I had met Sebastian's mom and dad in Los Angeles, because Sebastian and Laurie used to live in LA, but they're from Paris. Well, they're from Set, actually. And Sebastian's parents had said, because they had stayed at my house, they said, oh, well, next time you come to Set and stay with us. Sebastian's mom and dad do not speak English at all. And
which turns them into a resource, doesn't it, really, for you?
And so I go down there and I stay for a week, and it was absolutely magnificent, because I have my little boy. They had a baby, and he was born on my birthday, and so I call him my little boy. He's 3 years old now, and he does not speak English, but he did say red to me, and car and truck. So that was, he was very excited about that. And Sebastian's parents, like I said, do not speak English. And so I was in an environment where there was no one speaking English. Every so often, because Sebastian's parents' accent, because it's as far south as you can go, was just a teeny bit different. So I had to get my ear to it, and I would look at Sebastian and go, and he would mouth the word in English. And then I go, oh yeah. So, I would continue with the conversation in French. And then we went to Set, the actual city, and hung out with Laurie's mom and dad, and they don't speak English. And so it was that nice total immersion, but constant. I was there for a week, so it was constant every day. And other cool aha moment for me was I was talking to Sebastian's dad. It was just the two of us, and we were out by the pool. Sebastian's dad built a pool, really nice. And we were talking about, he was asking me why I hadn't retired yet. And so I was telling him, but I wasn't thinking that I was speaking French.
Yes, this is really interesting because I was in a pub because this was after I'd gotten back from Besançon. I was then back in London. You'd still stayed out there for a bit. Then
Yeah.
you'd done that. And I remember the pub I was in. I remember eating and chatting to you on the phone. And I said, "Oh, how was your day, Brent?" And you said, "Oh, and it was really nice." And I saw, the dad, and he was telling me about this, and he's telling me about this. And I was going, "Oh, that's really interesting," because I was interested in what this guy had done. And you said how he built this beautiful pool, and he was telling you about the town. And as I was eating, even though I am A, your friend, B, has been to France with you, and C, I'm your French teacher, there was a moment when I was eating and I was like, fuck me, she means she's been having this conversation in French, because it just seems so natural to me that. And I went, Brenda, I'm assuming this was in French, and you're like, oh, he speaks no English, Luke. So it's really strange. I had the same moment about you that you had about yourself with that guy. I was just like, wow.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
like,
that's great.
like,
Yeah.
and we were out there, just two of us, having a beer, talking about life in general, and what he did when he was a boy, and how now he's retired and he's so happy, and maybe I should retire. And he's like, well, when you retire, you come back here, you buy a little place, I'll fix it up for you, and it'll be such a happy life. And we'll both spoil the grandson like stupid crazy. And then Sebastian walks out, and he's just like standing there. And I was kind of wondering why he was standing there.
Did he have a moment of watching you in French, just living that moment?
Yeah, he had been standing there before, but I didn't notice him. And then I look up and I go, oh, hey, and he's just kind of still standing there. And his dad and I are still having a conversation. Then mom comes out and she joins in. And then later on, Sebastian tells me, job well done, in English. And I said, what? Excuse me, because it was as if I was having the conversation in English, but I wasn't. And for a moment, it kind of scared me, because I said to myself, oh shit, I'm speaking French. But then,
like when you're swimming in the sea and you suddenly realize how far out from the beach you are. And until you look back at the beach, you didn't realize. Yeah.
Oh, wow, I can swim. And it was really great, because it was very natural. It was what it was. And I think another month of being there with Sebastian and his family, well, with his dad, because Sebastian had to go back to Poitiers to work, but it would have been really great. And then Sebastian, Lori, and I went to some place way south, but closer to Italy, because we were meeting some friends, their friends, but coincidentally people that I had met one time. We all got together in Paris, so I knew these people too. I'm like, wait a minute, I know you.
Which is nice. So I think, let's be really clear. So sometimes some people, so if already straight away you're the sort of person that wants to learn a foreign language, there's already something about you, because it shows that you're inquisitive, you're interested. It's very rare to have somebody that has just got an academic fascination with a language, or they just enjoy the sound of a language, that doesn't have a little bit of personal interest in either the country or the people, or just other people and the notion of otherness. I'm not saying it never happens. I do have sometimes people who are just so hardcore academically interested in the French, or it's like a work obligation. But generally, if you're a language learner, or you've even got an ear, if you've got the ability to pick that up as an ear. So one of the things I always say to people, which I always used to say to you, is whenever you used to tell me an anecdote in English, you do a very good impression of the person you were talking to. So you'd communicate to me through an impression of that person's vibe. And I'm like, that is a linguist. You are effectively copying. And I think one of the things that happens when you start spending time in a country is you stop obsessing about the words and you kind of mimic and imitate what you're hearing rather than I must just go down and write these words down. You know, I find that really, really kind of cool. The other thing I'd say is then that not everybody that might be watching this video that would be contemplating doing this. So some people socially in a situation, and this includes being in England or America or Australia, you don't always want to be the only person in a room that doesn't know anybody. That's sometimes a little bit anxious. Some people thrive on that, some people don't. I'm gregarious as fuck. And, you know, have gone into rooms, have gone into castings, have gone into job interviews, have gone into this. I couldn't care less. I've gone on stage where there's been like thousands of people. That's not my problem. But I remember, and I obviously speak French like fluently. I remember meeting Vero's family, and she has a big family. And there was one Easter, and there were 70 members of her family in like a room, in like a house, because there's that many cousins and brothers and and they all wanted to meet me because I'd been doing some volunteer work with their son, as you well know. And I walked into this, and just as I got out the car, Vero turned to me and she went, "Are you nervous?" I went, "Why would I be nervous?" And she went, "Because there's 70 people here that all want to meet you and you don't know any of them and they all know each other." And I was a bit like, shit. So, in other words, to make this really clear, if you're socially somebody that's watching what Brenda's doing and going, "I really love to do that for my French," or for yourself before it's too late, just go and do it for yourself. It is quite easy to get over this situation straight away. You only have to meet a certain little crowd once at the beginning of your time there, and then it is the same friends, the same bakers, the same whatever. You know, and Gabby did a great thing, which is this, you know, I think it's called On Va Sortir, We're Going to Go Out website.
Yeah, I did that too.
Where you join a war. So, in other words, you're not strange in wanting to be part of the community. There are French speakers who want to be part of the community.
Oh, yeah.
There's this dynamic baby boom generation of people that want to do stuff. And so you get up on these websites, you get on these applications, and you go out for a walk or a meet or a ballroom dance or whatever, or a hike or a swim, wild swim, with people who are there who are French, who want to meet people as well. And you're often the resource for them. They just want to meet people, you know. And when you are a foreign speaker and you go to France, you see everybody as a resource. You see the milkman as a resource. You see the woman in the, oh, good, I'm going to get 10 minutes of free French with this person. Oh, great. But you're a resource to them as well. And that's one of the powers that you've got, they're interested in you. So that would be my other advice, would be if someone was a little bit socially anxious about doing this generally, get over it, because within a matter of days, you know, and I'd actually go further and say, if you are in a smaller village, admittedly, perhaps not in August, but if you are from a bigger metropolis style place in the English speaking world, you're gonna have more, "Hello, Marie, how are you? Didn't see you yesterday." You're gonna have that small town vibe thing going on a lot faster in France, in the middle of nowhere, than you're gonna have in a big city anyway. Do you know what I mean? And stuff.
Oh yeah, I do. I mean, I practice. I just do it. I just do it. You know, I am in a knitting community that is huge. And fun fact, I went to this open house the other day, Friday, and because I knew that there was this woman that was from France, that coincidentally from Paris, I've been going to her shop for maybe like 10 years, a little more than 10 years. Every time she changes it, I would still go to that, you know, her location. Well, she just coincidentally happened to be in Chicago right now, um, doing a trunk show. So I go, and she goes, "I know you." And we have all these mutual friends, coincidentally, that we didn't know in Paris. And so we started talking, and I said, "Oh, I missed you in Paris, but I was in Besançon." And she said, crazy, "I learned my French in Besançon. That's
Yes.
why my
Yeah.
husband." And I was like, "No shit. You're the second person that's told me that."
At
Because,
the language center.
right,
Yeah.
because one of our mutual friends is American, but well, she's French now, but you know, from America, owns a restaurant. She and another woman own a restaurant in Paris, and I go there a lot. She's my friend, and when I saw her in Paris, she said, "Well, how long are you staying?" I said, "Well, I'm going to be here for, quite a while." And she says, "Well, let's get together next week." I said, "I'm going to be in business some." She goes, "No crap.
It does earn respect
No
from
crap."
it
Because
does earn respect
she
from the French
school.
community. When as an
She went
American,
to school.
yeah,
Yeah, she went to
they
school as and
yeah,
so
it really earns respect. It
and so
earns a shitload of respect. When you basically, if I meet somebody with a foreign accent in London and I just happen to talk to them and they say, "Oh, well, I used to live here," and it isn't in zone 1 to 2 of London, straight away I'm like, "I like you, I love you, you bothered to travel." And France thinks the same thing about the fact that you've been out of Paris. I'm going to end with an anecdote from me, and then I'm going to ask you, before I sum up advice about what we would give anybody that was thinking of doing this, I'll ask you a question about what your advice would be. I just want to end with one anecdote about what I think was just fabulous. So, this might seem like an ugly story, but it's not. So, there's a really lovely boat trip around the river, because Besançon, as you've probably seen if you watch the video, guys, it's like a loop. It's effectively like a sort of partially attached island that's got like a loop of the river that goes all the way around it. So it's like the river creates like effectively like a small little island. And obviously, like most towns with a river, there is a boat trip, and people go on this boat trip, and there are two main companies. And anecdotally, I'd told Brenda, who was really gutted she wasn't able to go last year, that there was a guy who had been perfectly pleasant the whole way around, but that when we got to the section of the river where there were fewer older buildings, randomly he decided to do this really ugly, very socially reductive impression of a Chinese accent, just for the sake of it, because he said, "Oh, there's a really good Chinese restaurant over there." And I just thought, that's so 1960s comedy. Like, what the hell's wrong with you? Like, and also there was a friend of mine who was on the boat with us, who is an American, but is of Chinese heritage ethnically. And I thought, that's so dumb. And if his kids were with him, that'd be really ugly. And indeed, he did take his kids back to see Besançon himself, which is really flattering to me. He did Rome, Paris, London, and Besançon. And anyway, when we went as a group, the same guy did exactly the same impression at the same point. And he previously apologized last year and said, "Oh, I won't do it then." And in addition to this, the same guy who was French but had a North African heritage himself, so you'd think he'd be empathic towards people making this kind of comment. And every time we saw a young woman sunbathing, some of whom were topless because it was France, he'd make a noise and so this was like a big 100 people boat that would go past on the river, wouldn't it? And he'd literally do the horn and go with his microphone at these naked women. And you were thinking, are you for real? And when we got off the boat, a bit of me was thinking, "Oh, do you know what? I would love to say something to defend Jason from last year." I'm making sure everybody's got their shit. I'm on teacher duty. I'm on dad duty. I'm making sure nobody's left their phones or their bags or all of this kind of stuff. And Brenda goes ahead of me. And as I come down the stairs, Brenda in French is arguing with this guy and saying, "I was really offended by what you did and you need to cut it out." And he was like, "Oh, okay, okay." And then he tried this token bullshit. And you were like, "No, I'm not stupid." And then he said really rudely in French, "Okay, well, I won't do it next time. Well, as long as you're on board, I won't do it then." Like thinking, he's really clever because obviously you're not going to be on board every day. And you just didn't let him get away with it. And you were just like, "No, I'm sorry. There's no need to do it." And he said, "Oh, well, women really like that." And you were like, "No, they really don't like it." And Lizzie, who was with us, who's obviously, a young woman, she was like, "No, we really don't like that." And I just thought, that's cool. So we can talk about how warmly people are accepted. We can talk about bakeries and cafes and all the gorgeous little baguette rustic gorgeousness that people want from France. But to me, what's badass cool is that some douche acts like a dick and that you're like, "Okay, do you know what? I'm going to take you down in French." And that for me is just as much as a result. Do you know what I mean? Like, so in overview, pick a town where you think you're not going to be inundated with English. Do some research in advance into what clubs and societies there are for local people in your interest. It might be that you've always wanted to do something and that you don't get the chance to do it. And that if you're taking time off work to go and spend time in Europe, you might want to do that hobby. Do that in advance. Find out what networks there are online as well. You know, the world has changed. You know, there's apps, there's all of this stuff that you use in your own country. Do it before you go. Join up to that stuff. Get a rhythm going. Treat cafes, treat supermarkets, you know, all this kind of stuff, street vending stuff. Get a rhythm. Be the first person to make the contact. Talk to them. Don't be afraid to say, could you please stay in French? Don't be afraid to have a communication and ask people to repeat things, you know, because that's the other great thing. They're not teachers. They won't simplify. They won't automatically make this available to you. They won't necessarily know how to give you this. And they won't know as teachers, well, this is the kind of work that people tend to do in the first couple of chapters, and I'm going to stick to this chapter. They'll just speak as French people. So that's my kind of advice. Know that you can, because with all due respect, Brenda, you're not 32 and you've done this and you've made it your life. What advice would you give then, not just to women, not just the people who, you know, over 50, over 60, what other than, yeah, by all means do it, life's too short, go for it. What advice would you give practically, logistically? You know, what advice would you give to anybody that's loved France for ages and is really thinking of doing this? What advice would you give on a practical level to make this happen for somebody, to finish up?
They just have to not be afraid. And I have a bracelet that it's like my model for life. I've had this model since I was really like maybe 10 years old, because this drunk guy on a stoop said it to me once.
What did he say?
Go for what you know.
Yeah.
Go for what you know. You know that you want to do it. If you go for what you know, then you will just do it. You will figure out how you want to do it. You already know why you want to do it because you know it. And you have to live the life that you live in the United States or Mexico or Japan or whatever. You do the same things in a foreign country. Yeah, you can see the the tourist spots. You can go to the Louvre and the Tour Eiffel and places like this, but you just live your everyday life, but only you're not in America or you're not in Spain or Mexico or any other country, and you just go about your everyday business, and truly you will it's a much richer experience. Because and I would say, don't take a buddy. Don't take
Yeah,
a buddy.
strongly.
Don't take a buddy. Do it by yourself. Because
I even go as far as saying, what did I say? I even said to you in the first week, I said, don't have 1 hour long English conversations on WhatsApp with David, didn't I? I said, you'd have done all this work in the day to get used to French, to make it your go-to thing you're hearing. And I said, do not overcall in English of an
no,
evening.
didn't overcall. It was like in the well, we talked in the evening. The good thing was David was working, so he was occupied with work. But
Yeah.
we speak in the evening for a little bit. It was kind of super late for me, so I was tired. So I was like, "Yeah, I had a great day. How was your day? I gotta go to sleep. Bye. Love you. Bye." Um, and as long as he knew I was safe, he was good with that. Yeah, don't take a buddy. I'm telling you, the best experiences I've ever had anywhere traveling in the world by myself, and I've traveled a lot, were spent by myself. You're never really by yourself.
People won't come up to you really in the
No,
same way. They'll feel they're interrupting a couple.
they,
They will
they
feel they are interrupting.
I
Yeah.
plant my
They'll feel a third wheel.
yeah, even in the
Yeah.
Korean because I was into Korean food for a bit in Paris.
Yeah.
Still am. I don't know why, but I love Korean food now. I was the woman stood there for a nice chunk of time speaking to me in French with a Korean accent. And I don't think she would have done that had a friend of mine and I've been there
No.
together. And
I mean, it might be, I'll be honest, it might be, and this is no bad thing. And if you're somebody that can't envisage sitting at a restaurant on your own in the United States or in London or Britain or in Australia, if you're somebody that would feel, oh, I feel ever so weird sitting at a table on my own, then you need to do this kind of trip for your soul anyway, let alone for the language. You need to know who you are. You know, you might have been a mom, you might have been a dad, you might have been a grandpa, you might have been your profession. You kind of need to do that. We don't just do these trips as sabbaticals at 18, 19 before college or after college. Like, this is good. This is a good thing to do. Do you know what I mean? And stuff like this is great on a personal level, let alone on a, you know, on an academic level, you know.
And people basically, it doesn't matter what country you're in. I've had the same experience in Morocco as I've had in Mexico, as I've had in Montreal, Vancouver, places that maybe are very different from each other. And Tepoztlan, which is a very small little pueblito in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
People are good. There are people
for the most part, yeah.
People are genuinely interested. If they see someone that doesn't look like them, people are generally interested.
Yeah.
In finding out, in acquiring knowledge about a person that looks very different from them. They're interested in finding, hey, where are you from? What do you do for a living? Why are you here? They're very interested in those questions and the answers. And they will come up to you and ask you in whatever language that they speak, because they don't necessarily know that you speak a different language than they do.
I think what I'm going to end with is this idea that when you're little and you don't quite understand all the big words, and I mean even in your own language, like English or French, whatever you are, kids are very good observers. And people always say, oh, children and animals, they can always tell if somebody's a good person, because you learn to read not just the words that are being said, but you kind of assess people, and people communicate in different ways. And one of the joys of spending time in a foreign country that you don't speak the language in perfectly is that you have to really rely on that little sense again. And also, conversations are honest and real. People don't do a generic talk about politics, talk about the weather, talk about whatever. People want to know that you're okay. People want to talk about you, as you said, who you are, what your experience is, what you think of their city, what you think of. So you can often have deeper conversations than you get if you literally took the subway every day to go to work. Do you know what I mean? And stuff. So that's the only other thing that I'd say as well, is it is really revealing about yourself. And the other thing I'd say, and I'm going to end on this because I think you give me such good thing for people to think about, is I had two friends called Paco and Victor. I still have two friends called Paco and Victor. And Paco had, like Francisco, had a massive job at the National Library in Spain. And Victor, his husband, was an area manager for McDonald's. And don't get me wrong, perfectly great guy, but Paco was just the brain. Like, any word at all in Spanish, I could say, right, this word, what's the etymology of this word? And he'd be like, oh, this is from the Moorish occupation, this is from so and so and so and so, this word dates from, I mean, just an absolute brain on legs. So articulate in Spanish, so that person, that clever, witty, play on words, whatever. Every time he spoke, it was like, you were listening to like Cervantes or something. And don't get me wrong, Victor was cool, social, good-looking guy, friendly, whatever. So like a lot of people, they decided to come and live in London. At the time, there's a lot of Spanish diaspora over to here, whatever, economic work. Spain had a bit of an unemployment thing a few years ago. So a load of Spanish came across. And Victor absolutely he just shat all over it. In 6 months, he was just like fluent in English, super social, walked into pubs, would speak to anybody, was working in English in McDonald's again. He'd gone right back to working, frying stuff again. And then he'd basically quickly gone right back up because he spoke to people. Because he was prepared to be dumb for a while. And when you go to another country, you're not clever, articulate Brenda, because you don't have the language in the way that you have it in English. You have your voice, you have your skills. As you know, Ursula says in the Little Mermaid, your voice. You don't just need the language, your voice can communicate a lot to people as well. But you do lose the language. And if you hide behind, or you really thrive upon an identity, that's often really hard. Yeah. It's like if somebody's been very beautiful their whole life and then they kind of get older, you've got to learn to have something else other than that. She's only ever been beautiful. She's never valued for what was in her brain. That's a hard journey. So that's quite a big thing for people to do as well. And I recommend everybody try it, because when you go abroad, you aren't the same person. You don't have access to the same skill set. You don't have access to the same wording. And who are you at a party if you're not that person that's the super brainy, super clever? You know all the people, you know your job in your own country, you know references, you know people, you can network, you can name drop. All of that is taken away from you at first in a foreign country. And then you play catch up. And that's when people go, no, do you know what? It's sink or swim. I'm going to learn to do that. And that's when it's really interesting. But I think legitimately everybody should be fascinated by whether or not they can handle that experience. And I really think everybody owes it to themselves to see whether or not they can. You shine, but not everybody can. And I also think, if I'm honest, that people, you need to see what comes across of you, from you, about you, other than what you're telling people. What, show not tell. What of you is coming across? And I think that's desperately cool and desperately interesting. And I don't see why somebody wouldn't want that experience, really, as much as you can then go and learn the language. So all I'd end with is, do you know what? Yes, it's slightly frightening, but ask yourself why it's frightening. Is it that there's no healthcare in France? Of course not. Get a travel insurance policy, but emergency healthcare is obviously absolutely fine, the same as it would be in any country. You're not going to wind up with a massive ass bill the way that if you dialed an ambulance, even in the States.
I've gotten sick in France. Just so you know, I got really sick in France.
Yeah.
Had to
you
go
did, didn't you? But you still got pharmacy stuff. You still have, yeah. There's no problem.
It's kind of cool because it's not like the United States. Nobody, and they still haven't asked me, and that was like a couple of years ago. Nobody asked me for, well, what kind of insurance do you have?
Yeah, nobody's what Medicare. Yeah, of course. Nobody as well. And I really don't mean to be rude to Americans per se, but this is a very, very, very big thing. Is people are like, oh, will I get COVID? There are rates of COVID in the United States that surpass where France is currently. There really is. And, so I knew people this year who were like, oh, we don't get COVID, who brought COVID with them. Jason and his family, for a start, were like, oh, we don't get COVID. We're going wearing masks and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, dude, I love you to death, but you've just been on an aeroplane with a load of people breathing the same air. And then you've been on a subway, and then you've done this. You ain't the COVID. You're the COVID risk to the people. You're not the COVID victim. And everybody goes into this like, oh, we're going to get this if we go on holiday. And I'm like, that's one thing I'd say as well. Like, and I literally had a guy who would have absolutely adored this experience. He would have done so well. He was doing so unbelievably well. But he was like, bottom line, he was like, I just can't afford the COVID risk. And I'm like, you live on the Eastern Seaboard in a massive, you live in like kind of Philly, effectively. You were like, what the heck? You're speaking as if it's like the Hellmouth and we've got Ebola or something. So for a start, do your research into that, guys, because that's not the other thing. Healthcare, by all means, get a small travel insurance policy, but that is doable. There's always somebody that's going to help you. It's not undoable. The overheads in terms of money and stuff, it's not ridiculous. When you have an apartment, you can buy supermarket food. You don't have to buy in a restaurant every single time. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Fine, we ate out in restaurants when we were with you a lot, but that was because it was the the fun week. But for the rest of the time that you were there, you were off to the freaking store buying normal food. You weren't out.
Hey, I was, talking tomatoes. And
Yeah, exactly. So it's not like that. And so finally, my overall thing would be, this is doable. And if Auntie Bren can do it, anybody can do it. Yes.
Yeah. And I did it on the cheap. I mean, I can afford to, be in the really great hotel and all.
Of course you can. You earn your job. Yeah. You earn your living.
I didn't see that it was necessary to go that route.
No,
And
and you'd have denied yourself the French contact because you'd then be locking yourself in a service industry where you'd have been treated like a client, and
I
that's not what you want.
yeah,
You want to go and sit and have a cigarette and a drink with the people in the hotel when they're on their shift break. That's what you would see as the bonus. You don't want to go and sit in the lounge and I mean, fine, we did a champagne and we did all of that, but you want to go and sit with the people that are moaning and the people that are having the chat. That's your commodity.
yeah.
Do you
My
know what I mean?
my thing is, I'll have what you guys are having in the back.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah.
I'll because I know you guys are cooking up something good back
Yeah,
there
yeah, 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 yeah.
that
Yeah,
doesn't have
don't get. Yeah, yeah.
live
That's the
here.
thing in Mexico more than anywhere, isn't it? It's like no, 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 no. Exactly, exactly, exactly. No, no, no. Like France, you don't always need the she restaurant. You can have a sauce
Mm-mm.
casserole of cassoulet with the neighbor and just sit and chill. Thank you so very much for your time.
Well,
If even what guys, if you've enjoyed speaking to Brenda and you've enjoyed her comments on this, do please write underneath because I think it's fabulous what she's done. If anybody has any structural I will be running language trips this year with people that I don't teach privately. That is something that I'll be getting going. So if you wanted like a safer way of doing this, but it would entirely be in French, this will be taking off and I will be running residentials. And, you know, it will be the intensive, but it won't be like an English sitting around in English kind of situation like you get at a school where everybody else there is English. So there is a halfway house to do this. So do please let me know underneath if that's something that you're interested in this year. But if there's anything else structurally or logistically or how could you make this happen for yourself or whatever, then do please comment underneath, you know, and I'll answer those questions. But, you know, there's also never a good time. There's never the best time. You know, Brenda's a mom, she's a grandma, she's got, you know, beautiful daughters and grandchildren, all of whom have social obligations, all of, you know, some of whom have health problems. She has a husband who obviously needs her support. You have to make this time for yourself. Otherwise, do you know what? You run out of time. You know,
yeah,
so that's the other thing. Let's be clear.
time is
Brenda,
not,
yeah,
it's not guaranteed.
do you know what I mean? Get it done, and all it will do is enrich everything else that you do. It really, really, really will. So let me know in the comments if you've enjoyed speaking to Brenda and her complete candor about how can be done. It's totally not a pipe dream. I just want to end by saying that you're all the 1%. So anybody that goes to a dinner party and says, I want to learn a language, I want to learn to play the piano, I'm always said I was going to learn to play the guitar. 1% of people that talk that actually do that. And as much as I talk a lot for work, I'm a big believer in doing. Don't tell me that you're watching the videos. Let me hear that you watch the videos. Don't talk about it, do it. So you're already the 1% of the population that you're doing that. Those that contact me, like Brenda, for example, for tuition, they're the 1% of the 1%. Of that 1% that actually decide to do it, about 1% of that will really not just live on apps and various YouTubes. They'll go, no, I actually want tuition. I actually want somebody to kick my ass into doing this. That's the 1% of the 1%. And then of that percentage, those that go, do you know what? I'm going to residentially up my shit for at least 2 months. Because you have dependents, you have mortgages, you have lives, you have things, you have children, you have all of these things. People go, why didn't I do this when I was younger? Often it will be somebody older who's, you know, at a stage where they can do this. That makes you the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. That makes you fabulous. So if you're even itching to do this, congratulate yourself on the fact that you're itching to do this and just go and do it. Just go and do it. Absolutely. And I would say there's not one person I've taught who has gone and done this kind of thing who hasn't come back transformed. The work Brenda is doing in her classes after this experience compared to this before this experience, there's just no comparison. There's just no comparison. You know, I'm pushing over the big girls. You know, it is linguistically transformative as well as on a personal level. Good. All right, guys, please let me know in the comments underneath if you've enjoyed this interview. You know, I think Brent is an absolute source of inspiration on many, many levels, you know, as well as the French. Thank you for your time, Brenda, my love. I love you as always. Big kiss, my darling.
Bye.